Another European economic salvo is heading toward Moscow as the European Union proposes a gradual embargo on Russian oil. Now, the new sanctions regime would mean a sizable cut to Russia's energy income from its Western neighbors. And it's not just oil. Banks, too, are also in the focus of this sixth and toughest round of sanctions imposed by the EU for Russia's war on Ukraine.
Stepping up the pressure on Russia, Ursula von der Leyen chose the European Parliament, the lawmakers who represent the EU citizens, to drop her big announcement.
Today, we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe. This will be a complete import ban on all Russian oil, seaborne and pipeline, crude and refined. We will make sure that we phase out Russian oil in an orderly fashion.
The plan is to phase out oil by the end of 2022. Hungary and Slovakia, which are very dependent on Russian oil, will be granted longer transition periods. Besides the oil ban, von der Leyen also presented other sanctions in her sixth package. The European Commission now wants to take off Sberbank, Russia's largest bank, from the SWIFT financial transaction system. And the plan is also to target military officials involved in the atrocities in Mariupol and in Bucha. And 3 Russian media outlets will be banned from European airwaves for spreading misinformation, in addition to Sputnik and Russia Today. It is with the ban on energy, however, that the EU is hoping to hit the Russian economy the hardest. But only phasing out oil is far from enough for many lawmakers. They want bolder steps.
Finally, we have oil, even when it will take still 6 to 9 months to implement it. And I'm also waiting for a ban on gas, because what we are paying to the war machine of Putin is mainly what we are paying for Russian gas.
The EU's ban on Russian oil could cause even higher price spikes for energy and fuel in Europe, putting a burden on European citizens. A price the EU has to pay to show solidarity with its neighbor, Ukraine, many lawmakers think.
We have to understand that one price to fight this bloody war will be this oil and gas embargo in the end. Yes, and we have to make sure this is socially compensated for those people, for those households who could not pay the higher price.
EU countries must still agree on the sanctions package before it enters into force.
And for more, I'm very pleased to welcome Daniela Schwarzer. She is the Executive Director for Europe and Eurasia at the Open Societies Foundation. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Let's start with the proposed sanctions by the European Commission. A complete import ban on Russian oil, phasing out its use by the end of 2022. Now, that still needs to be agreed by EU countries before it goes into force. How likely are we to get a consensus?
The question really is to what extent transition periods can be granted to EU member states, because some are more dependent on Russian oil deliveries than others. Hungary is one of them, Slovakia is another one. And one might think that Hungary could be tempted to block the package because of its proximity to Russia, which is nothing that would apply to Slovakia, which is among those members of the European Union that really have very early on and continuously delivered arms to Ukraine to fight Russia. So I think the art will be in the compromise, and I do think that the European Commission has prepared today's announcement very well. In your report, the German Minister of the Economy said this has to happen. So I think the consensus is building up. But some member states have to get extra long transition periods because it's very ambitious to phase out oil within 6 and 12 months.
And just to clarify, do you get the sense that states like Slovakia and Hungary will be satisfied with longer, if offered longer transition periods? And is that something that other EU states would be willing to offer?
I think the EU in general will be very keen to build a compromise, because showing divisions to Russia, to the world basically, would not be the right thing to do and should be avoided at all costs. So I think they will offer transition periods first, and if that's not enough, there could be some kind of compensation. But I believe that transition periods will already help because it's possible to replace oil, but all the EU is very likely to suffer higher oil prices. So the questions how citizens, how consumers actually deal with that situation is a very sensitive one. And one thing that the EU has to bear in mind is that the sanctions on Russia are definitely right. But at the same time, the EU is going through its climate transition, which also puts pressure on energy prices. So it has to find an equitable and fair way to deal with both challenges at the same time. If not, public support will vanish.
You're right to mention that this ban does appear likely to be a big burden on European citizens. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warning that it won't be easy. Where specifically will this hurt the most?
Well, I guess the most symbolic and visible thing is fuel prices. So people who have to use their car, for instance, to get to work, in particular in rural areas, will feel this very clearly. And those prices, you know, they are kind of up on the wall. You can look at them every day. And when they climb, there's immediately a sentiment, of course, that something bad is going on. The other thing is, of course, heating prices. That is also very quickly felt by citizens. But, you know, it's not only individual households, it's also the industry that has to reckon with rising energy prices, and they are high anyway. So all in all, this will be also a pressure on the European economy, not only on the Russian one. But at the moment, the political consensus still seems to be, with the sixth package being presented by the European Commission, that it is worth for Europe to bear this price, because it has to be made very clear to Russia again and again that this war is unacceptable, and the brutalities and the war crimes, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned that word today as well. It is very, very important to show Russia over and over again that Europe is willing to pay a price itself, because so much is at stake in Ukraine for Europe as well.
And on that note, I'd like to take a step back and get a sense of how far-reaching these sanctions would be. I mean, how hard would they hit Russia relative to previous packages?
First of all, on oil, this is a next step. I mean, it's really a new quality of sanctions, because oil and gas are the most important flows of income for Russia. It will, of course, try and replace Europe as its client by others, but that won't be easy, and that won't be very quick, because there's also competition on the oil market. Then comes the financial system. So another 3 banks are being taken off SWIFT. One of them, Sberbank, is the largest consumer bank in Russia. So this will hit the economy, so the financial system, but also individuals pretty hard when they see that their bank is no longer functional. So I think this is a new phase of escalation in sanction policy on the EU side. Then there is an additional package of individual sanctions. Very symbolically, the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church is being sanctioned for his support and encouragement of Putin's war, and individuals who are in the military and who have been tracked down in Ukraine, so actually have been identified as committing war crimes. So the message is very clear. The European Union is doing everything, also on that very individual basis, to trace war crimes and to hold those accountable, not only Putin and his elite system, but also those who fight in Ukraine and who kill innocent people and commit war crimes. And I think that is a very, very important message, not only to Putin and the Russian leadership, but also to Russian citizens who in part seem to either ignore or still support this war and the atrocities of the war, just as the news on sanctions have to be brought to the world audience, and in a way that is still possible. It's getting more and more difficult, also to Russians who may be still watching some Western media.
Now, one of the big questions that's come out of Russia's war on Ukraine has been the ability of the West to react quickly enough. President Joe Biden saying this week that China's Premier Xi Jinping believes democracies will lose out to autocracies because they're slowed by that need for consensus. Given that, what is your overall assessment of Europe's reaction to the war in Ukraine?
Europe prepared well, and I would say not only among the 27 EU countries, but also with the United States across the Atlantic. This was mainly possible because the United States shared intelligence well before the outbreak of the war, and this was used to actually prepare the response. So we saw a very different pace of reaction and also strength of reaction comparing the beginning of the war now to the annexation of Crimea by Russia in the year 2014 and the beginning of fighting in eastern Ukraine and the Donbass. So the EU stood out more strongly and sided with Ukraine very clearly. But of course, consensus needs to be built and built again. And right now, with the development of sanction packages, and we are now looking at the 6th package already, of course, they get more costly for both sides. And so consensus has to be fought for and has to be built, and there will have to be some compromise among the 27 EU member states. But for the time being, I think Putin will very probably be surprised by the European Union's ability to act together, and not only on sanctions, but also so many countries have delivered arms to Ukraine. The welcoming of Ukrainian refugees is remarkable in the European Union. And so there is a lot of support for Ukraine. And this may actually surprise Vladimir Putin, who thought he would win this war in a much, much shorter time span.
The stakes are high. Daniela Schwarzer, Executive Director for Europe and Eurasia at the Open Society Foundations. Thanks so much for taking the time to break that down for us.
Thank you very much for having me.